Greetings everyone and welcome back. This is where we left in our previous video. We want first of all to fix the alignment for our select all and our checkbox inside our data row. So let's go back to our code editor, and here what we can say is that inside our header here, instead of having text here, header text, which is wrong, so I'm going to have text center. And same for the form check. I have for check should be form check, like that. Same as our data row here, it should be form check. And let's just save that, go back to your browser and try to reload the browser and see what we get. And now we have our check all box and checkbox data row aligned the way it's supposed to be. What I want to have, instead of the status inside our data row, what I'm going to have is a switch. So I'm going to copy one of these feathers icon. I'm going to copy this one and I'll put inside our status data column here, and I'm just going to change the data feather, and what I'm going to have is a toggle. I'm going to have a toggle, and for now I'll have it on the left, like that. And the color that I'm going to choose for this switch will be success. Then I get a green color. I'm going to save that. If I go back here to the browser, you can see now I have a switch inside my status. So if the status of employee is active, this switch will be green. Otherwise, we can change the color dynamically according to the status of our employee. Okay, now what we're going to do, we're going back to our controller, and from there we can now fetch the data back to our table. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to close that. I'll go back to my employee controller here, and the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to create an instance of our employees model. So what I can do, I'm going to say employee instance. I'm going to have an instance as a variable, so I'll say employee instance, and this variable, of course, you can make it protected, but for me I'll just make it public. I'll have it is a public property of this class, and I'll have it as a public property. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to have a constructor. So I'm going to say public construct, like that. And here I'll inject the model, I'll inject the employee model. So I'll say employee model, and this employee model is going to come from the up, then I'll have models, and then I have the employee model inside here for employee model, like that. Of course, I'll change this not in capital, but employee model, like that. So this one will be the capital one, like that, and that is what we're going to have an instance for. So here I'm just going to have this in a variable called employee model, like that. And now here I can assign my employee model instance, or my employee instance, to the employee model that is being injected inside the constructor of this controller. So what I do, I'll say this, referring to my employee instance, will be the same as the employee model instance created by the dependency injection inside our constructor here. And that is it. So here, instead of saying the employee, instead of initializing our employees data into an empty array, what I'm going to do, I'm going to reach out to this controller, I mean this model instance here, this model instance we created here, and I'm gonna go inside the model itself. So this one should be, I'll just copy this inside this, and inside this model I'm going to create a function or a method with the same name as this method inside our controller, and I'm going to pass along the request object. So I'll copy this and I'll pass it to this get employees Ajax method inside our employee model class. So after doing that, so we have to go inside the models, and then we bring in this method. So I'm going to my models here, employee models, and I'm going to create this function or method if you'd like. So I'm going to say public method is equals this, and this method accepts one argument, which is a request. We can accept it as whatever you want to accept it is, but for me I'm just going to have it as a request like that. So let's just quickly run our code and see if maybe we could be having some issues. So I'm going to bring in the console and I'll go to the network tab. I'll just reload my page and see if we're going to have any problem, and sure we do. We have a problem, and it's telling us the target class model employee model does not exist, and that's because it's inside inside a folder. So before we get to the employee model, we have the models, then we have employee, and then we have employee model class. So again, we're going to save that. I reload again the page, and we have now an undefined employee instance, a variable public employee instance, which is this, I have it wrong, employee instance, and that should do the trick. So I'm just going to reload my page again, and there we are. So it means that method it's now created and we can continue to use it. So I'll just navigate to this model, which is this one, and inside this function, what I'm going to do, I'll now query my database. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to check if my request has a variable, the date from, you remember the date from that we created, date from. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to convert that date from using Carbon. So here I can say using Carbon. Carbon is a date plugin that we use to, it's a date manager, so it will manage your dates then and periods and whatever you want to do with dates. Carbon will be there to help you manage your date. So I'm gonna use it to pass my date. So I'm going to say use Carbon, of course, Carbon like that, and this Carbon, and now I can use Carbon inside my my code here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to say date from will be given by Carbon, the Carbon that we've just brought in, and I'm going to pass the incoming date. So I'm going to pass the request date from like that, and I'm just going to say to date string like that, so that I create a date from the incoming date. And again as well, I'm going to pass the date to, so date to will be given by the date to coming from the request. I like that. Another thing I'm going to check is if maybe we set this date inside the session. So I'm going to say else, in case we have this date from inside our session. So I'm just going to say if session has a key of date. So what I'm going to say, I'm just going to say get, and here I'm going to say the key, which is date from. So if our session contains the date from, it means that we have already stored the date from and date to inside the session, and for that case we're going to use this session dates to fetch our data. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say session date from. I'm going to have copy that. I'm going to copy this one and also this one. I'm just going to have it here. I'm going to say that from and date to will be equal to date from and date to, respectively, coming from the session that we created. That is at all if we created a session. Else, if we don't have a date coming from the request and we don't have a date inside our session, what we are going to do, we're going to create our own date. So what we're going to do, we're going to say the date from and date to. So I can have this and I can have this as well. So we're going to say the date from and date to, it's going to come from the current date, which is today. So here I'm just, instead of passing anything, I'm just going to get the current date, and I'll just convert it to a date because we're going to get it as timestamp, and now I'm just going to convert it to date of the current date. What I can do in the start date from, or the date from, instead of saying to be current, I'm going to say start of month, so that I get the whole month. I get the whole month by getting start of month, and onto the another date, which is date 2, I'm going to say end of month, so that I get whole month duration. So this one will give me a whole month duration from when the month was started until the end of this month. So like that. Another thing I'm going to do, I'm going to have another variable. Remember, we have a per page that we defined. So per page, the initial per page will be equal to the request per page. Request per page. This variable should be coming with the request, which is per page. And also I'm going to have another variable. I'm going to say the sorting column. Remember, we have a clickable sort icons. When you click on them, they sort our data accordingly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a sorting column. This column will be used to sort our data. So for now, which the default one, I'm just going to have created. So by default, I will sort my employees by created that column. But in case our request has a sorting column, so in case, so I'm going to say if the request has a sorting column or has a sorting column variable, and this sorting column variable is not null, if it's not null, then we're going to use it instead of using the default sorting column which is created. So I'm gonna say if is set, and set is the sorting column. If is set the sorting column, then we'll mutate our default sorting column to the incoming sorting column around here. So instead of having created it as our sorting column, then we're going to change that, and we're going to have the sorting column change to the incoming sorting column. So after that, I'm going also to have another variable, and this is the direction. So I'm going to have sorting direction. So I'm going to say sorting the direction, and by default I'm going to have a descending direction as my sorting direction. But if we have a direction coming from the request, so if we have a direction, then we're going to default, or we're going to have our sorting direction mutated to match the incoming sorting direction. So I'm gonna copy that. I'll update that so that if we have incoming sort direction which has a variable of direction, we're going to update our default sorting direction to the incoming sorting direction. Another thing I'm going to have is the per page. So I'm going to say if we have an incoming per page, so if we have a request has input of per page, if request per page is if we're going to get the request per pages, or we want to return all the data inside our table. So the way we can do that, I'm going to update per page. Remember that our per page is going to be coming from the request. We can say here, instead of, if we do not have per page, we can initially define our per page here and say initially we can have it as 10. So that we don't care if we have an initial one in the beginning of the page or we don't. If we have it, okay, we'll update it here. If we don't have it, then we'll have a 10 as our per page. So, but the best way to do this is to set the initial page or the default per page from the front end. So we will set that from the front end so that we reduce the amount of code on the server side. So here, if the request per page is equal to all, so what I can do, I'm going to set this per page. Now I'll mutate this per page, and I'll say per page will be the same as this, and this refers to the instance of this class, which is our employee model, and I'm going to say count. I'll get the count of employees inside this this table, and I'll set that as my per page. Then after that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have to put some data inside the session. So I'm going to have session, and I'm going to put the date from. So I will have date from, and I'll put the date from variable that we have. I'll have the same for our date too. I'll still have date too, and I'll put inside the variable date too. And for me to be able to use session, of course, I'll have I'll have to import the session. So here below the use of carbon, I'll say use session like that, and that should bring in the session, or we can be able to use the session. After that, now we go to fetch our data. So the way we want to do that, I'll just make a simple query, and I'll say return. I'm going to return this, and I'll say this, and I'm going to say where between, and now I'm going to have where between my dates, where is the date from and date to, and where between takes two arguments. The first one is the column, which we can say created at, and the second one is an array of dates from and date to. So we already have our date from, so I'm just going to have it here, and I'm going also to have a date to. So it's going to have to fetch our data from the date from until up to date to. So that's a way to get data from the database, having a start date and end date. But the problem here that we're going to have is that the data from and date to, they are date objects, and they create that column inside our database. This column is a timestamp. So it will reach somewhere where we cannot get the correct data due to this created that column inside our database being a timestamp. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to create a small function inside my class. You can scoop this function from this class and put it as a trait, of course, because it's going to be used in many places. But for now, since we're only going to use it in this class, so it means that I can put it just here. I'm going to have it here, and I'll say public method. I'll say convert column, and it's going to take, we want convert to, so I'll say convert to, and the column itself, so column itself. So here what I'm going to do, I'm going to return db and db row, say row, and I'm going to say I want to convert, so I'll have the column, which is this one. I'll have the convert to, we want to convert to, and then I'll have the column itself. So I'm going to have the column in itself inside here. So I'm just going to have a concatenation like that, and then here I'll close the bracket. I'll close the bracket inside here, sorry, inside here. So, and I'll close this, and now I'm going to have the column inside here. This one should be like that. So I'm going to convert my column, this one, to whatever it's incoming here, and now the function is okay. It's now done. For me to be able to use this, I'm going to come here, and I'm going to say, going to reference this function that I've just created, say this convert column, which takes two arguments, and the first one, it will be convert to, I want to convert to date, and the column that I want to convert to date is the created column, so like that. And now we'll have the same data type, we have the date, and we'll have our created at column inside the database also is a date. After that, I'm going to check also if we have a search input coming from the request. So I'm going to have when the request has a search input, then we will use the search input to return to search the keyword from our database. So I'm going to say when request has search, then I'm going to have a function, and I'll say function and what I can do, I can say I'll use the request object. So I'm going to just copy these requests, and I'll say I want to use it inside here like that, and here I can just say query, just have a query, and now I can use this close here, and I'm going to say I'm going to query my DB where I'm going to pass the employee name, I'm going to have the employee name, and I'm going to say where the employee name. It's like the search that's coming, but I'll have to I'll concatenate. I have a word cut, so I will concatenate that, and I will say a request search. So I'll have to get the employee from my database where name like requested search term. I'll copy this. Before I copy this, I'm just going to say or where same as this one. So I'm just going to have this. So actually I'm just going to copy this, have an arrow here, or where I'm going to paste this one in, but now this time around will be not name but our email. So I'll say email, and the same will go for phone number, employee phone, like that. After getting that, I have to tokenize this, and now here I'm going to say order by. I'm going to order by the sorting column, that variable that we have, and the sorting direction that also we have we have assigned to direction. We have default by default, which is descending, but if we get one from the request, then we're going to use that one, like that. And what we want to do is paginate. I'm going to paginate my data, and I'm going to pass in the per page variable that we defined here. We have per page, and this per page could be coming from the front end with the object of a request, or with the request object. And after that, we will get back our employees. So what we can do to test this one if it works, because we return it from here, and so it means that in our employee controller here, we have it and store it in employees variable, and push the employees variable inside our employee list partial. We can go to our employee list partial, which is here, and try to print out the we can try to print out the employees. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to say a JSON, and I just want to print the employees variable and see if everything works out. I'm going to save that. I'll go back to my browser. I'll reload and see if we're going to get data or we're going to get error. And of course the db facade is not found, so what we only need to do is to bring in the db using the use keyword inside our employee model here, because we use the db in our custom function here, which is helping us convert our timestamp column to a date column. So I want to say use db just like that, and that should bring in the db facade that we can use to interact with our database using the query builder. I'm going to save it again. I'll go back to my browser, and we're going to wait for a request, and sure enough we have another error. So undefined request, and I'm sure we should have a typo somewhere. So I'm just going to search for the request, and sure enough we have a typo. I'm going to copy this one, I'm going to have it here, and I'm going to replace all the typos that we have. I'm gonna save it again. I'm gonna run my code again and see now what's the problem. Column not found, between. Of course, where between, this one should be between. Sorry, it's my typo, but what can we do? Okay, let's see if we get another error. And of course this one, it's printing out the employees variable is a string. So let's go back to our JSON. Should be JSON, not JSON, but the other one. So let's see if we print anything, and sure enough we have our data from the database. So we are getting data from the database, so the only thing remaining is to arrange it inside our table. So the way we can do that, I'm just going to copy these employees from here. I'll delete this, and I'm just going to create a loop. I'm going to say add for each employees as employees is employee. I'm just going to have a key here, and I'll put my tier inside like that. I'll put inside my T body like that, and here what I'm going to say, I'm going just to bring in the key plus 1. Remember, the key starts from 0, so we're going to increment it by 1, and if it's 0 it's going to be 1, if it's 1 it will be 2, etc, etc. So for the image, what I'm going to do for my image, for now I'm just going to bring in a static image. So I'm going to say I'll go to the assets, and inside the assets I have a folder called images. Inside the images I have another folder called let me check, images, then icons, and inside the icons I have a file called icon3 con3.png, like that. And I'll just define the width of, because I have to reduce the number of square of the brackets here, and like that. So here, instead of having this, just going to have an image, and this will be the source width. I'm just going to have that, which will be the same as my head. So like that. That's for our image. And as for our name here, I'm just going to bring in the employee, then I'll say employee name, employee underscore name. That will go for our email as well. So employee underscore email, and as well as our phone number, which will be employee uh, underscore phone, like that. I'm gonna save that. I'll go back to my browser here. I try to reload the data, and sure enough, we have now our employees being listed. And remember that they are coming now from the database, that is from the employees data table. What we can do, we're going to have a list of paginations. So let's go ahead and add some paginations down to our list of employee. And the way I'm going to do that, after this division here, I'm going to have a div with some of the classes. I'm just going to say I want this to float on the right, so I will say float right. So it should be on my right side, same as text. I want it from to be aligned on the right, like that. And now I'll just bring in the employees. Then I'll just say employees links, like that. I'm gonna save that. I'll go back to my browser. I'll refresh the browser, and it's gonna say, maybe I wrote employees there should be, of course, a variable, so it should have a $ employees. That would be the problem. And now if we reload the data, we should have our employees being listed, and we have very big icons here. The problem with these icons is that by default the Laravel 9 by default is using it's using Tailwind CSS, but on our tutorial here I am using bootstrap. So what we can do, let's go back and correct this. We're going to list bootstrap as our default theme and not Tailwind. The Laravel 9 by default is configured to use Tailwind for navigation links, but we're using bootstrap, so we have to update our Laravel to know that we are using bootstrap and not Tailwind. So let's go and update the service provider and tell them that we are not using Tailwind but bootstrap. So here what I'm going to do, first of all, I'll import the paginator class. So I will say use Luminate, then paginator, and of course paginet, like that. And now here I can use my paginator here to say that I'll be using bootstrap 5 and not Tailwind. So paginator, I'll say use bootstrap 5, like that, and that should change the default pagination theme to bootstrap instead of using the Tailwind CSS. So I'm gonna save this. I'll go back to my browser. I'll try to reload the browser, and paginator is not, of course, it's an O and not R. So this one should be an R, yeah, like that. And same here, should be paginator, like that. Gonna save it again, go back to browser, reload the browser, and paginator not found. Okay, what I can do, use the capital I for illuminate. Gonna save again. I'll reload. Illuminate paginator. Yeah, and that's because this one is supposed to be pagination, I guess. Pagination. This one should be pagination, and not paginator. Paginator should be the class, and this one should be pagination. So let's see if our pagination is working correctly, and here we are. We have now our pagination using the bootstrap theme instead of using the default Tailwind CSS. But for now it's not working because we have to update it to load the page and send the page number. For example, if you check into our URL, we see that we are sending page number 2, but it's not getting affected because we have to do something inside our jQuery to send the correct page. So thank you very much for being with me in this video. When we come back in the next video, which I guess or hope it will be our last video, we're going to deal with changing the dates per page and our search button, our search input here, as well as our pagination. So thank you very much for being with me on this one. I'll see you in the next one.